Let freedom ring and the dumbest bill in America. We even have a go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today, of course, is Christopher Hopkins, our producer. And this podcast is called Let Freedom Ring and the dumbest bill in America. Yes, we are back from the Labor Day weekend, and it is great to be back from that long weekend. And for some of us, you know, like I took an extra day off. It was really a wonderful thing. I'm happy to be back, and hopefully you are too. Actually, September in Maryland, this podcast, we have people listening to it from all over the country, but September in Maryland actually is the most beautiful month in the state, as far as I'm concerned. October is too. And so it's really kind of fun to be here because the humidity is down, it's still warm, and the sky is blue and clear. Very happy to be here. So this podcast is called Let Freedom Ring. First up, college football fans, give Biden the bird. Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. So college football fans across the country, they, of course, attended en masse at the stadiums across the country. And they're, smushed in as close to one another as possibly can be imagined. And the pictures, as far as the eye can see, you don't see a mask. You don't see them wearing a mask. And I'm actually quite happy about that because that is a choice. That is a freedom choice, right? It is your choice to attend a college football game. It is your choice to wear a mask, and it's your choice to not wear a mask. And that's exactly what they did. They made that choice because that's what you do in a free society. And they decided that they're tired of not being free. They decided that they're glad to be back because football is back. There's no better example than that, than Metallica's Enter Sandman being played at the Virginia Tech game. And to watch this clip, you'll be able to see it. If you're not watching on YouTube, you can listen to this. I mean, these college students just went crazy. You can tell they're so happy to be free again, to live the college life that they are certainly entitled to. We have that clip, and here it is.
College football is really back when a jam-packed Lane Stadium is singing along to Enter Sandman.
Can you imagine? I mean, this is pure happiness, pure college spirit. This is exactly what you want to see. And this is exactly what you want to experience when you're in college. And they have been denied this. They have been denied this for a year and a half. And they've been told, you've got to be vaccinated to go to college. You have to wear a mask inside your classrooms and so forth. You have to do all of these things. And by the way, some colleges are indeed doing that. Not all colleges, thankfully, because it is a freedom issue. It is up to you. You are in the prime of your life in college, and you should be able to choose for yourself what is best for your own health and whether or not you want to attend a football game. And oh, by the way, for all of you maskers out there, and for all of you folks out there, and by the way, you want to wear a mask, that's fine. Just want to make that perfectly clear. I'm calling you maskers because I get these people all the time. I go in my local grocery store and I see them wearing masks, and I'm certain that they're vaccinated because you can just tell by the demeanor and the attitude. You can just tell. You just wonder to yourself, what was the point of being vaccinated if you've got to wear a mask? But if you don't want to go to a college football game, you don't have to. But CNN, oh, forget it. CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, they went crazy over these college football games. By crazy, I mean the news media consistently and constantly criticized college students for being at these events because of COVID. Folks, once again, these people are in college. They're supposed to be there. They're supposed to be having fun. Stop being the fun police, mainstream media. Let them live their lives. And to prove to you how upset the college students are, and Democrats, you're losing them. You're losing these college students because if anyone believes in freedom, college students do. Here's Coastal Carolina. Listen to what they're saying in a massive chant at their football stadium. We have that clip, and here it is. I mean, I think there are better ways of expressing your freedom, of course. It's not my choice of doing it, but this was happening across the country at these football stadiums. People are just tired. They're tired of the overreaching government telling them what they can and can't do, telling them they can't have fun, telling them they can't live their lives. Here's Virginia Tech, the same kind of chant not just at Virginia Tech, not just at Coastal Carolina, but across the country. We have that clip from Virginia Tech too. Here it is.
Fuck Joe Biden! Fuck Joe Biden! Fuck Joe Biden!
So, I mean, across the country, and once again, mainstream media was losing it. They were like, we shouldn't be doing this. I mean, these students, they're not wearing masks and they're putting their lives in danger and so forth, etc. And of course, actually, quite frankly, that isn't true. They're in the prime of their lives and they have little risk whatsoever to succumbing to COVID, and they know it, and they're tired of it, and they're tired of being told what to do. And I'm so pleased to see not just that college football is back in person, but I'm also so happy to see that freedom is ringing across the country. Thank God freedom is ringing across the country. And Mark Cuban, of course, speaking of, the fun police, Mark Cuban, the Shark Tank star and the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, he faces a test on the Texas new national anthem law. So he faces a test because, of course, Mark Cuban is the guy who likes to always talk about his immigrant roots and at the same time doesn't want to play the national anthem at the Dallas Mavericks game. Can you imagine this? So this fundamentally at its core is what really drives me nuts. Namely, when you have individuals who always are touting their immigrant roots and then at the same time hate on America. I mean, this guy is filthy rich, all right? Self-made, good for him, by the way. It's an impressive thing. The man is self-made, and that is a cool thing. And he's an NBA owner of the Dallas Mavericks. That is a cool thing too. But then, rather than taking a stand for all that is good about America and to thank America for the opportunities it has bestowed upon him to become a billionaire, instead, he decides he's not going to play the national anthem. Well, Texas, the state of Texas, passed the so-called Texas National Anthem law that you would be fined, and the fining is through Texas subsidies. And it's kind of a smart way to do it. So here is what it reads on Yahoo Sports. Mark Cuban, a regular on ABC News Shark Tank and the owner of the NBA Dallas Mavericks, could potentially face millions of dollars in government givebacks thanks to a new Texas state law. The Texas Star-Spangled Banner Protection Act law went into effect Wednesday, requiring professional teams in the state that take public money from the state to play the national anthem. So if you take public money from the state of Texas, then you have to play the national anthem. So what does that mean? Well, if you're in a stadium and that stadium has a professional sports team, the chances are that stadium received some help, some taxpayer subsidy or from some taxpayer direct funding to make that stadium possible. Well, that money came from the taxpayers of Texas in this particular case. And since that is the case, you better play the national anthem. And that is the law in Texas, okay? If you didn't take money from the state of Texas when you built your stadium or when you're operating your franchise, then you don't have to play the Star-Spangled Banner. So Cuban decided to no longer play the national anthem in pregame ceremonies at the beginning of the 2020-21 season. Of course, when everybody was losing their minds. It was only noticed in February of this year. The NBA subsequently issued a statement saying all teams will play the national anthem in keeping with longstanding league policy, but did not provide any penalties for those teams who chose not to do so. Cuban said at the time he would comply. Now, the new Texas law mandates his compliance. It specifies that teams need to return government funding if they don't play the song. So that's pretty good, right? So Cuban, who likes to, once again, always tout his immigrant roots and that he is a self-made man, well, if he's getting subsidies from the state of Texas, will have to return all of that money if he chooses not to play the national anthem of the country that has made it possible for him to be free and to pursue his goals in life and then become what? phenomenally successful. And that is precisely why we're calling this podcast Let Freedom Ring. You have on the one side the college students throughout America at football games in person once again who are saying, enough already. Stop telling us what to do. We are free. There's no freer time than when you're in college because typically your tuition is paid for and your food and your boarding are taken care of as well. So the only thing you really got to do is show up at class and study, and that's, by the way, that's a great thing. That is a great time of life. And they're like ultimately wanting that freedom to continue because they haven't been able to do that for the past year. They haven't been able to go to college games. In many cases, they haven't been able to go to college in person at all. And then you compare and contrast that to Mark Cuban, who's like, well, I'm an immigrant and I'm really a spokesman for immigrants. And, my family is an immigrant family. And therefore, as an immigrant family, we want to make sure that, we're going to not play the national anthem? Just ridiculous. So good for you, state of Texas, for creating a law that actually makes sense. It's a very narrowly defined law. And I like that, right? It's a very narrowly defined law. It's not saying you better play it or else. It's to everybody. It's saying, look, if you're going to take money from us, there's going to be strings attached. If you're going to take money from the state of Texas, you need to endorse the values and follow the values of the people of Texas. Makes perfect sense to me. Don't just take our money. Also, you need to follow our values. So next up, podcast listeners, Herschel Walker is running for the United States Senate in Georgia. I'm sure you've heard this. He is indeed running for the United States Senate in Georgia. He has put together a campaign video that is spectacular. We're going to discuss that in a minute. I want to play this campaign video. Look, if you're listening to the campaign video, you can just imagine the visions of Herschel Walker growing up in small town Georgia and starting out in a very poor family and working his way up and then becoming this incredible football star. But more importantly are the values that he talks about, and it's driving the Democrats crazy. It's a little on the long side, this particular YouTube video commercial of him running for Senate, but he's narrating it all the way through. It's, a little bit more than a minute. It's worth listening to. And the reason it's worth listening to, because we're setting up CNN and the AP's response to it. So first up, here's the video.
I learned discipline, faith in God, and the value of hard work. I learned about sacrificing the things you want in the moment for the future you can have if you work hard enough. I've been a lot of places, but in Wrightsville, I learned the important lessons. If you want it bad enough, you work for it, you can get it.
The 1982 Heisman Memorial Trophy, Herschel Walker.
You might stumble, make mistakes, but you only fail if you give up. The politicians pick American against American, rich versus poor, black versus white, urban versus rural. I don't believe in that garbage. It's a lie. I'm a conservative, not because someone told me to be. I'm a conservative because I believe in smaller government, a strong military, personal responsibility, and making sure all people have the opportunity to pursue their dreams. That's an America worth fighting for. My name is Herschel Walker, and I'm running for the United States Senate. I'm a kid from a small town in Georgia who's lived the American dream, and I'm ready to fight to keep that dream alive for you too.
Incredible. I mean, such a moving commercial. And it's also moving because of the fact that he talks about his small town roots, how he came from nothing, how he has lived the American dream, and how he doesn't like this idea of entitlement, this idea that America is a bad place, the idea of personal responsibility. He actually says that term. He says personal responsibility. This is probably the most alien term in the Democrat lingo that you can possibly imagine. Democrats don't know anything about personal responsibility. Talk about Democrat politicians. They never talk about personal responsibility. If they were to talk about personal responsibility, they would lose their next election. You can't talk about that. It's not allowed. But then you've got Herschel Walker, who, by the way, happens to be black. And here he is saying exactly what the Democrats are telling the black community that they shouldn't have. They shouldn't have personal responsibility because the only reason why they're in the condition that they're in, whatever that condition may be, is because of the color of their skin. Herschel Walker's like, I don't think so. You know, I grew up in a small town. I started with nothing. I worked hard. I have personal responsibility. I've made mistakes along the way, and I've learned about those mistakes. And there's no place on earth that would have given me this opportunity other than this great country. And that's what I want to maintain and restore when I become a United States Senator from Georgia. And the Democrats are freaking out. Proof that they're freaking out. You want proof of that? Oh, CNN Politics. Herschel Walker appears to be doing a whole lot of nothing in his Senate bid. Can you imagine if you are a reporter of a major news organization and you decide to put a title such as Herschel Walker appears to be doing a whole lot of nothing in his Senate bid? I mean, that's news. I mean, well, of course it is. Because when you're CNN, you're not really reporting, you're advocating. So this is from Chris Cillizza, CNN editor at large. It's an analysis by him. It says, Herschel Walker has been running for the Senate for almost 2 weeks now. It's 2 weeks. And he appears to be doing, well, very little. As the former professional football player and first-time candidate announced his highly anticipated Senate campaign on August 25th. And since then, he has proceeded to hold no public events, nor has Walker granted media access to local Georgia press, although he has spoken with Fox News, Fox Radio, and over Labor Day weekend, Fox Sports, for a total of 5 interviews. A quick Google search for a homepage for Walker's Senate campaign turns up only a fundraising page connected it to WinRed, the Republican small donation company. The Republican small dollar donation company, There is no public schedule listed on that page. Over the coming weeks, Herschel will conduct a listening tour that will take him to every corner of the state, the campaign told the Washington Examiner. The truth that the campaign won't acknowledge, but which animates Walker's early low profile, is this. Only bad can come from him running anything like a normal campaign right now. What? Walker faces a series of allegations from his ex-wife. Here we go, CNN. He only announced 2 weeks ago. Here's CNN. Walker faces a series of allegations from his ex-wife and an ex-girlfriend, as well as a third woman, about his personal conduct. His campaign has called it sad that people who praised Walker for his openness in regards to his struggles with dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, were now criticizing him. Of course, allegations of threatening behavior against multiple women is not the sort of thing that can or should be dismissed, regardless of the circumstances. So you can imagine where this article goes from here. Oh, way to go, CNN. Oh, good job. CNN can't wait to sack, excuse the pun, any kind of black politician who talks about personal responsibility and good old American old-fashioned values of hard work and personal responsibility and getting ahead and loving the country that gave you these opportunities. In the AP news, no different. As Herschel Walker eyes Senate run, a turbulent past emerges. It doesn't emerge. Not emerging. It's the media, the mainstream media, trying to absolutely crush his campaign before it even starts. Why would they want to do that? Because they're terrified of a Herschel Walker campaign. They know that a real Herschel Walker campaign could easily prevail because he speaks so plainly. He speaks so self-deprecatingly, right? It says, here's the AP news. At first glance, Herschel Walker has a coveted political profile for a potential Senate candidate in Georgia at first glance. He was a football hero at the University of Georgia before his long NFL career. He's a business owner whose chicken products are distributed across the U.S. And he's a black conservative with backing from former President Donald Trump, a longtime friend. But an Associated Press review of hundreds of pages of public records tied to Walker's business ventures and his divorce, including many not previously reported, sheds new light on a turbulent personal history that could dog his Senate bid. The documents detail accusations that Walker repeatedly threatened his ex-wife's life, exaggerated claims of financial success, and alarmed business associates with unpredictable behavior. Walker, who is now 59, has at times been open about his long struggle with mental illness, writing at length in a 2008 book about being diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, once known as multiple personality disorder, but it's unclear how he would discuss these events as a candidate. So, isn't it interesting that CNN and AP, two far-left organizations, are essentially mocking a candidate who is black because he has had mental health issues in the past? I mean, this is something they would never do. In the past, actually, those two organizations would be celebrating mental health issues and saying, oh, the more reason why they should be, of course, in the United States Senate. I mean, these are, after all, the two news organizations that believe that men can be pregnant. Okay, so if they're news organizations that believe that men can be pregnant, then they themselves have mental health issues because it's not possible, all right? It's not. But that's the typical thing that's happening with the mainstream media. You have a great candidate, and that great candidate steps up, decides, has lived a wonderful life, a stellar life, and then they're trying to find everything they can to crush his campaign because of the fact that it's really not about whether he's black or white. It's the fact that according to CNN, he's a conservative. It's the fact that as a black person, he has gone off the reservation, the Democrat reservation, and that isn't allowed. So next up, podcast listeners, are we importing the entitled? I mean, we're talking about in this podcast, let freedom ring. And yet this story came out about the United States bringing in Afghanis from Afghanistan and not properly vetting them. We've heard this and we've asked millions of questions. The press has, are you vetting them? If so, how? And then we have this story that has come up about an Afghan refugee who's complaining about the food that he's receiving from the United States while being detained. Of course, he's not yet in the country, but during the detention, he's not in Afghanistan either. I think he's overseas in one of our military bases. And in the meantime, obviously, what ends up happening? Well, we have to feed them, clothe them, provide them health care, provide them facilities to live in, facilities to shower in. I mean, it's going to cost us a fortune. It already is. And my question is, are we importing the entitled? Because an Afghan refugee has tweeted about the food that he has received, and he's not happy about it. So, providing the adage, this is in the Western Journal, providing the adage that no good deed goes unpunished, a refugee from impoverished, war-torn Afghanistan whined via his taxpayer-funded iPhone and Wi-Fi service that the free food he's being served at a Texas facility isn't up to his grandiose standards. So he's being provided, apparently, not just the food and so forth, but an iPhone and Wi-Fi service by the United States taxpayers. Quote, not complaining, but this is what I got last night for dinner. And the next meal is 12 hours later, Hamed Amhadi tweeted Thursday from Fort Bliss. Quote, refugee life might be safe, but never easy and favorable. This is what this idiot said in a tweet. I mean, he's an Afghan refugee, and he's being taken care of by the American taxpayers, and he's complaining about his circumstances, about the free food that he's getting. Amadi disdainfully posted a photo of a tray of food that appeared to contain fish, fruit, and 2 slices of toasted bread. So here's the tweet. Hamed Hamadi, not complaining, but this is what I got last night for dinner. And the next meal is 12 hours later. Refugee life might be safe, but never easy and favorable. Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. So this guy is in Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. That's where he's being held, presumably while he's not just being vetted at the same time, hopefully, but also determining where they're going to put him. Because once these Afghan refugees are released from not just El Paso, Texas, at Fort Bliss, but elsewhere, where do you put them? Where do you resettle them? Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for their rent and their daily expenses? I mean, they're not going to just like show up in a community and be able to pay rent and find an apartment. I mean, we're going to pay for that, and for how long? And he's complaining about his food. For reference, Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries in the world, where 47.3% of the population lives below the poverty level. Presumably, many of them would gladly consume the meal that Hamadi criticized. Later Thursday, Hamadi spoke to KTSM TV in El Paso, Texas, where he continued to complain that life in America wasn't living up to his lofty expectations. Quote, "So the situation here is not as good as we expected. I had the problem with the situation here is that the U.S. government was not really prepared," he said. It's true, thanks to President Joe Biden's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the United States was not prepared to handle the unprecedented barrage of unvetted Afghan refugees flooding the country. Last week, the Biden administration said the goal was to take in 50,000 refugees from Afghanistan. This is on top of the up to 2 million illegal aliens from Central America who have flooded the United States by September, and I'm quite certain not a single one of them is vaccinated, or very, very few are actually vaccinated. So there is another cost just on top of that. So I'm reading this Twitter feed, podcast listeners, and here are some of the responses to this idiot Afghani who is so ungrateful and so entitled. So WD-40 plus is the Twitter handle. It says, "Here's more of the cost of your meal, sir." And this Twitter handle person put on Twitter pictures of a son taking the flag at his father's funeral. Mothers and their children and the wives and fathers holding the casket of an American military person who died in Afghanistan, and there are numerous pictures of that. And so then that was one of the responses. And then another is from God Saad, S-A-A-D, says, "How about thank you? Be grateful. Have some humility and exhibit some dignity. No one owes you anything. I'm a refugee from Lebanon, and I am forever grateful." And then Amy Turkanian, "I was unable to reach a homeless veteran to ask how they like their free meals and free housing because they don't get those things. Also, they don't have iPhones." And then Tim Young, "I'd be happy to pay for your ticket to go back since it's so rough here that you have to take your sandwich apart and put the bread out of the shot." So he took a picture, this Afghan refugee took a picture of his food, and he had 2 slices of bread, but he took the slices of bread out of the tray of food and shot to make it look like there was nothing there, hardly any food. And look, it's fine. He didn't like his food. There is an alternative. You can always go home. I mean, you can always go back to Afghanistan. But here's the point, podcast listeners. Here we have someone who is already complaining, and he's entitled. And these are the people the Democrat Party want in the United States. This is why they don't have to go through the regular process of becoming American citizens or becoming residents of the United States. And that's because the Democrats are trying to import the entitled. They want to import the entitled because entitled people vote Democrat. It's the whole point. And here you have this kid who's complaining, and why are we providing them iPhones? I mean, how long is that going to last? It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. I'm not heartless in saying that we should, just send this guy back and drop him in the middle of the Taliban and so forth. But here's the point. Someone should have a conversation with him, and a come to Jesus moment, or come to Muhammad moment maybe, and say to him, "You know what? If you really believe that this is not what you expected, we can send you back. And you need to be grateful to this country who's given you this opportunity, and you need to seize the opportunity of freedom and understand exactly what it means. Freedom doesn't mean you get free stuff. Freedom means you now have the opportunity to live your life as you've always wanted to and pursue the dreams that you've always wanted to pursue, and then take responsibility for it, as Herschel Walker said. And that's why we're calling this podcast Let Freedom Ring. Let freedom wing. That's right. Let freedom ring. Next up, podcast listeners, go woke or go broke. That's right. We have a go woke or go broke. CEO of Tripwire has been fired for supporting the Texas abortion law. So Tripwire is a company that provides gaming services and games, I believe. I think they design them and engineer them. The CEO of that company, right? The CEO was fired because he supported the Texas abortion law. He's now out of the company. So in the Daily Wire, the CEO of a video game developer based in Georgia is now out of the company after he tweeted his support for Texas's pro-life law, which bans abortions once cardiac activity is detected in the baby. Proud, hashtag U.S. Supreme Court affirming the Texas law. Here's what he wrote. Here's what the CEO wrote. Proud of the hashtag U.S. Supreme Court affirming the Texas law banning abortion for babies with a heartbeat. John Gibson, CEO of Tripwire Interactive, tweeted on Saturday, quote, as an entertainer, I don't get political often, yet with so many vocal peers on the other side of this issue, I felt it was important to go on the record as a pro-life game developer, end quote. That's what he tweeted. Okay, so imagine he's tweeted this, and it's just his name, John Gibson. It's not John Gibson at, the name of the company. So he's tweeting this as an individual, not as, a person who is representing the company. However, he did say, I felt it was important to go on the record as a pro-life game developer. Well, that's still, a personal tweet. He's still referring to himself. It's not from a company Twitter account. So Tripwire Interactive released a statement on Monday evening saying that Gibson was out effective immediately because of the comments that he made. The statement claimed that he stepped down. Quote, the comments given by John Gibson, CEO, are of his own opinion and do not reflect those of Tripwire Interactive as a company, the company said. His comments disregard the values of our whole team, our partners, and much of our broader community. Our leadership team at Tripwire are deeply sorry and are unified in our commitment to take swift action and to foster a more positive environment. What environment is that? Killing babies in the womb? Quote, effective immediately, John Gibson has stepped down as CEO of Tripwire Interactive, the statement added. Co-founding member and current vice president Alan Wilson will take over as interim CEO. Alan has been with the company since its formation in 2005 and is an active lead in both the studio's business and developmental affairs. Alan will work with the rest of the Tripwire leadership team to take steps with employees and partners to address their concerns, including executing a company-wide town hall meeting and promoting open dialogue. Unbelievable. So basically what you have is a bunch of little babies in the company at Tripwire saying, I don't like what the CEO said because he's pro-life and I'm offended. And because I'm offended, he has got to go. And that's the whole point of this segment of Go Woke or Go Broke, right? We're going to ruin you financially because you actually have an opinion, and it is a principled opinion that you have. It's very principled. And you explain that it is a principled opinion, but it doesn't matter because it's a different opinion and diversity of thought is not allowed. And that's what wokeism is about, right? Wokeism is about not permitting diversity of thought and eliminating diversity of thought by ruining you financially. And it's almost hard to believe that this is the United States of America and that this is even happening. But nonetheless, this is where we live now. And unless people step up and fight back, and unfortunately, fight back means elect different people, elect the correct people, fight back in courts, and continue to pass the laws that are principled, that reflect your values. We will not just lose our jobs and our way of life and our way of making a living, we will lose the country. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the daily Biden dumpster fire, and boy, is it full. The daily Biden dumpster fire. So good old Joe Biden has decided to pivot away from Afghanistan, which is a disaster. And he's pivoted instead towards the issue of Hurricane Ida. And Hurricane Ida, by the way, is not a hurricane, according to Democrats. It is climate change. So we're not allowed to call it a hurricane. We must call it climate change. Now, of course, hurricanes have been occurring throughout the planet for millennia, but it doesn't matter because even though they occurred long before humans have had any impact on the climate, it's climate change. It's not a hurricane. We can't even have that conversation. So Joe Biden, of course, wants to get rid of emissions caused by electricity, among all other emissions, by the way. Wants to get rid of emissions caused by cars as well. So he goes to New York and he talks about the damage that was caused by the after effects of Hurricane Ida, primarily by the massive amounts of rain. And he decides to use that as an opportunity to say that he wants zero emissions electricity in the United States. Now, the Democrat talking point on this used to be 2040. Then they went 2035. I've heard this before. I've heard some Democrats say that we only have 10 years to live. So maybe it's 2031. Okay, because that would be 10 years away, although they did say that like 5 years ago. Well, Joe Biden has a new idea. He wants zero emissions electricity by, what's the date? You're going to love this. We have that clip, and here it is.
We're going to deal with climate change and have zero emissions, net emissions by 2050. By 2020, make sure all our electricity is zero emissions. We're going to be able to do these things, but we've got to move. We've got to move.
So Joe Biden just said, we want zero electricity emissions by 2020. But it's 2021. So either we've missed the date or he thinks it's 2015 and he's still serving with, of course, that was even before then. He apparently thinks he's still vice president back during the Barack Obama years. And it's like, we want to get rid of it by 2020. And it just shows you what liars they are, right? Because when you're getting early stages of dementia as a president, because you're pushing 80, the chances are that a lot of truth comes out because you say all the things you're told not to say rather than the things you're supposed to say, which is they keep moving these goalposts, right? It's climate change. No, it's actually a hurricane. It's unprecedented climate change. No, we call that flooding. So we have to, as all humans have done throughout human history, adapt to weather. And we adapt to weather by doing a number of different things. One is by improving infrastructure, improving construction of homes, and also, in some cases, by not living in areas where there are floods. And in Manhattan, to be fair, you have impervious surfaces everywhere. Impervious surfaces are those surfaces, as you know, where water doesn't sink in. Okay, like asphalt, concrete. Well, that's the definition of Manhattan, except for Central Park. And so you have water falling like crazy in Manhattan. It has nowhere to go except to go into the drains. The drains are overwhelmed, so the water finds its way in areas where it hadn't found its way in many, many years. And so in Biden's idea, well, it's climate change rather than the fact that it's weather that is indeed changing. And then the question is, well, do you really think we can control the weather? And that's what Biden was talking about in it literally in Manhattan. He was saying, yes, we can stop. Here's what he said. We can stop climate change. We can't necessarily make it better, but we can stop it from getting worse, is what Biden said. Really? Human beings can stop climate change from getting worse. I would sure like to know a lot of details about that, specifics. I would like to see the scientific papers on this issue of how we're going to stop the weather from getting worse. And how would that be defined? And do we even have the information from weather since the beginning of human? I mean, it's just, the whole thing is ridiculous. But according to Biden, with his usual dumpster fire comments, we're going to get rid of electricity in such a way that there will be zero emissions by 2020, which was last year. But he just said it this year. And so Of course, if you follow Joe Biden, there's no shortage of the dumpster fires that he gives. So we even have a second one for you. This podcast, not just one, but 2 Biden dumpster fires. This one is, we don't call them tornadoes anymore. So in town hall, a confused Joe Biden doesn't think tornadoes are called tornadoes anymore. As President Biden surveyed the damage done by the remnants of Hurricane Ida in New Jersey and New York on Tuesday, he received a briefing from New Jersey officials on the progress they've made in areas in which they need federal assistance. In the course of this televised discussion, President Biden found himself talking about severe weather in meteorological nomenclature, and it didn't go well. Quote, it's all across the country, the members of Congress, from their colleagues in Congress that, it looks like a tornado. They don't call them that anymore. That hit the crops and wetlands in the middle of the country in Iowa and Nevada. And I mean, it's just across the board. And, as I said, we're in this together. We have that clip. Here it is.
Looks like a tornado. They don't call them that anymore. That hit the crops and wetlands in the middle of the country and Iowa and Nevada. And I mean, it's just across the board. And, as I said, we're in this together.
So this is what you do now as a Democrat politician. You use weather as a way of advancing your agenda on climate change. You don't call it tornadoes because you have to call it climate change. You don't call it hurricanes, it's climate change. You don't call it flooding, it's climate change. And so the article continues in town hall. While it's unclear exactly what the president was trying to say, I would have to agree with you there. Who knows what he just said? It seems he is confusing a derecho that swept across the city of Nevada, Iowa. So there's a city in Iowa called Nevada, Iowa, in August 2020 with not tornadoes that struck the states of Nevada and Iowa. Surely the president knows that Nevada is not in the middle of the country, right? In any case, to clear things up, tornadoes are still tornadoes and derechos are still derechos. Nevada is not in the middle of the country, but Nevada, Iowa is. Predictably, Biden's gaffe threw a quick reaction from meteorologists and residents in the states Biden mentioned as reporters and members of Congress piled on. So Janice Dean, she is a pretty famous meteorologist, and I've seen her in a number of different places, I think primarily Fox News. She says, yes, she tweets out, yes, we can still call them tornadoes. And she continues, he might be confusing tornadoes with derechos, which can look like tornado damage. And then just continued. The Nevada thing threw me off as well, she said. Okay, I'm done. And then Fiscal Therapist wrote, I've lived in Nevada for 32 years, and I just became aware that we are in the middle of the country, have crops and wetlands, and have tornadoes that wipe those out. In Indiana, Jim Banks says, in Indiana, we can call them tornadoes. Did I miss something? And then Ash Short said, what do they call them? Twisters? Vortexes? Wind turbines? And then Matt Vespa, tornadoes no longer exist. Biden stopped them forever. So look, one of the reasons we play these Biden dumpster fires is to demonstrate that he's probably not fit as a result of being in early stages of dementia, maybe even further than that. But in addition to that, it kind of exposes who Democrats really are, because a lot of truth comes out of his mistakes, the mistakes that he makes. Namely, that's very transparent at this point. The Democrats are trying to change and manipulate the English language to call anything associated with weather climate change. And that's very dangerous because you really can't solve a problem by calling it some sort of generic term. So if you have flooding in a specific area and you need to improve the infrastructure, then let's improve the infrastructure so that human habitability can continue and can thrive. If you have an area that is notorious for tornadoes, for example, Tornado Alley as an example, probably not a place I'm going to build a house in. I'm going to be quite frank. If I'm going to live in a place that is notorious for flooding as a result of a hurricane. And it's on the Gulf Coast in particular. I'm going to probably not invest in real estate there. It's certainly not in the area that is the lowest area there that always floods, because obviously there are other areas there that seem to be safe. So it's not the whole city, but certainly significant parts of it. Kind of just makes sense. But we can't really have those conversations if you say, well, it's climate change, so therefore you just got to. It's because Democrats don't want you to live in the countryside. They don't want you to live in certain states. What they want you to do, they want everybody to be terrified, just like they try to terrify us of COVID. And therefore, they want you to live in concentrated cities, because then they get to live in their country estates, of course, or they get to live on Martha's Vineyard. But you, oh no, you better live in an apartment somewhere because of climate change. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is.
Dum 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 dum.
And it is the dumbest bill in America, and it is gender-neutral stores in California. That's right, gender-neutral stores in California. So good old Assemblyman Evan Lowe is back. Evan Lowe is the sponsor of this bill. And the reason why we're bringing this bill back to Mark and the Millennials, because we've talked about this before, is because the bill is actually advanced in the California Assembly and the state Senate. And it has only one more hurdle before it goes to Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. So what is a gender-neutral store in California? Well, looks like this might actually happen. I can't believe the California Assembly and the state Senate are dumb enough to pass such a bill. Well, here's KPIX San Francisco reporting on what this bill does. We have that clip, and here it is.
Assemblyman Evan Lowe introduced a bill that would require stores with more than 500 employees, like a Target, Macy's, or Marshall's, to display children's clothing and toys in one undivided area of its sales floor, whether or not those items had traditionally been marketed either for girls or for boys. Stores that didn't comply would face fines up to $1,000.
Yes, so stores that did not comply with this would actually be faced with fines of $1,000. So you have to have at least one aisle in your store that has gender-neutral products. That is to say, either they're gender-neutral or the blue stuff and the pink stuff have to be interspersed in that aisle. Because, after all, you're not allowed to have boys and girls. You are allowed to have all different kinds of genders in California, including at birth and including with children who are toddlers and also in kindergarten and first and second grade. Because that's what Democrats are all about. They're all about grabbing into your personal household and telling you that those children don't belong to you. They belong to the Democrat Party because they are good little Democrat Nazi soldiers. I mean, that's what it kind of sounds like. I mean, maybe Stalinist soldiers. Just really frightening. I mean, these are not your children. Well, Evan Lowe, the bill's sponsor, he's tried to put this bill in. I think this is the third time in California, which is why we're talking about it again. So in California, he's put this bill in 3 times, and maybe the third time's a charm where it gets through. It looks like it is advancing this time. So in Evan Lowe's own words, podcast listener, here's Evan Lowe, the bill's sponsor, to tell you about why the bill is so important. Here's the clip.
And rather than just having a separate boys or girls section, let's just have a kids section. And that's what the conversation is about. Let's ensure that we remove the type of stigma, the type of bullying that we see, especially in today's day and age.
So I want to get this straight. So when you go into a store and you go to the toy section and you see a bunch of toys that normally I would think boys would be interested in, you know, like little pickup trucks and, you know, a baseball bat or what else, Chris? I mean, you know, monster trucks, just, I don't know, just maybe guns, you know, toy guns, if they probably aren't even allowed to sell that in California at this point. Well, he calls that bullying. So Lowe calls that bullying. Why is that bullying? It's a store just trying to sell stuff. How are you bullying people? So in the AP, it states California seeks gender neutral displays in large stores. Sacramento, California. Associated Press, California could soon force large department stores to display some child products in gender-neutral ways after the state legislature passed a bill on Wednesday aimed at getting rid of traditional pink and blue marketing schemes for items like toys and toothbrushes. The bill would not outlaw traditional boys and girls sections in department stores, but would require retailers to have a gender-neutral section to display a reasonable selection of items, regardless of whether they have been traditionally marketed for either girls or for boys. The bill would also apply to department stores with 500 or more employees, so most small businesses would be exempt. It also wouldn't apply to clothes, just toys, and childcare items, which include hygiene and teething products. The state Senate passed the bill Wednesday, sending it back to the Assembly for a procedural vote before it heads to Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. If it becomes law, California would become the first state to require these sections in stores, according to the office of Assemblyman Evan Lowe, the bill's author, whom you just heard. This is at least the third time in California lawmakers have tried to pass this bill, with previous versions failing to pass in 2019 and 2020, as we've talked about before. But it's 2021 now. Lowe, a Democrat from Campbell, said the measure was inspired by a 10-year-old girl named Britton, whose mother works in his legislative office. I have to read this again. Lowe, the assemblyman, who's the sponsor of the bill and a Democrat from Campbell, California, said the measure was inspired by a 10-year-old girl named Britton, whose mother works in his legislative office. Quote, Britton asked her mom while shopping why certain things in a store were off limits to her because she was a girl, but would be fine if she was a boy, end quote, Lowe said. Quote, thankfully, my colleagues recognized the pure intentions of this bill and the need to let kids be kids. This is Lowe. He's saying that Britton is the daughter of the mother who works in his legislative office. So he put the bill in for a kid. Okay. And according to the mom, Britton asked her when she was shopping with her why it was that certain products in the store or certain things were off limits because she was a girl. That's not true. I mean, I want to get this straight. When you're walking in a store with your son and you've got a shopping cart and you walk past the girls' aisle, you mean suddenly a chain link fence rises up from the floor and stops you from going down the aisle and looking there and buying things? I mean, it's ridiculous. And it's also equally ridiculous and hard to believe that this is actually a real story, because I'm sure it's not a real story that Britton told her mom this. This is nothing more than Assemblyman Kim probably reaching back at his own childhood and being very angry at the fact that what he really wanted was that pink Barbie doll, in the aisle, and mom and dad probably wouldn't buy it for him. And guess what? Those are his parents. They get to decide that. But he's probably mad he didn't get the Barbie doll, I'm not sure what Barbie he wanted. I mean, I have two daughters. I remember all the Barbies that they had. One Barbie doll was one of the favorites of my daughter, and the other daughter, sometimes would play with them and try to take them, and they would argue over them and all that stuff. Well, apparently, Evan Lowe, the assemblyman, he's really upset. He didn't get to play with Barbie, so he's going to pass this bill to make sure that you're forced to buy them. No, you're not. You're not forced to buy them. You're not forced to walk down the aisle. And you're not also stopped from walking down the aisle that you want to walk down. Some large retailers are already rethinking how they display their products. Target Corp, with 1,914 stores across the United States, announced in 2015 it would stop using gender-based signs in its stores. In other words, boys, girls, right? So now it's like they, their. What are some of the other gender names? I've forgotten. Like, there's so many of them now. They, their, he, her, Z, zir. I don't know. Millennials always get really intimidated by this conversation because it's like these days you have to put your gender at the end of an email, or your preferred pronoun. Quote, unlike the author, I actually have, oh, here we go. The California Retailers Association, you're going to love this, podcast listeners. The California Retail Association declined to comment on the bill Wednesday. Formal opposition has come from a number of conservative groups. State Senator Melissa Melendez, a Republican from Lake Elsinore, voted against the bill, saying she would recommend we let parents be parents. Quote, and you're going to love what she said. Unlike the author of the bill, I actually have children, 5 of them to be exact, and I can tell you it is very convenient for parents, she said. I don't think parents need the government to step in and tell them how they should shop for their children. End quote. Pretty straightforward. So, I mean, she just kind of ripped Evan Lowe. It's like, this guy is a single guy with, and maybe he's married, I don't know, but the point is he has no children. He has no children. And he's trying to tell the parents with children. Isn't it incredible how the childless in the Democrat Party, which seems to be more the rule than the exception, certainly of the elected officials, try to tell you how to raise your children. It's like, I have an idea. You want to have an opportunity to raise children? Why don't you just have them? Then you can raise your children. So Senator Scott Wiener, a Democrat from San Francisco, said that while both he and Evan Lowe are childless gay men, he defended their right to have opinions about children and families. This is just too good. So you got 2 gay guys from the greater San Francisco area that are childless gay men, but they want to tell you how to raise your children. Quote, we know what it was like to grow up not conforming to the way that your gender is supposed to be, he said, adding, this is about making safe spaces for all children in today's society and not pushing sometimes forcing children to conform. Jeez. While the law will require large department stores to comply, penalties for not doing so would be light. Just the fact that there are penalties at all. Starting in 2024, prosecutors could seek fines up to $250 for first offenses and up to $500 for second offenses. Those would be civil, not criminal penalties. Stores could also end up having to pay for reasonable attorney's fees and costs. So in other words, the stores that don't comply with this law are going to be hit with $500 fines again and again and again and again because of the fact that 2 gay guys want to tell you how to run your store and what you can put in and out of your aisles. It's just ridiculous. So we have another clip for this bill, and it's also from KPIX San Francisco. They're reporting, and they're reporting on opposing viewpoints to the bill. Here are the 2 opposing viewpoints of people they just, I guess, talk to in the street, kind of, sort of. We have that clip, and here it is.
You have the opportunity to walk to wherever you want to. Just because it has a male and female designation doesn't mean that you can't walk to, a male toy and vice versa.
I think it's a wonderful idea to smush girl-boy stuff together.
Gabrielle Antolovich is the president of the board of the Billy DeFrank Center. She says a single gender-neutral section for children's clothing and toys will help kids freely and without fear express who they are.
The children will be saying, why can't I have that? And it's not in the category that the parents think it should be.
Yeah, they still can, by the way. The children can still say that to the parents. They can watch it on TV as it's advertised or online because their kids are always online and see some ad pop up about some toy and say to their mom and dad, I want that. And the parents can get it online or so forth. Just ridiculous. And I hope podcast listeners, you see that the reason we do this segment in Mark and the Millennials about the dumbest bill in America is because we have these idiot politicians, by the way, on both sides of the aisle, many of them, not all, but many of them, but primarily it seems on the Democrat side, who believe that the way you are defined as an elected official is by how much stupid legislation you can pass so they can go home and say, guess what? I passed 20 bills this session. And, they're not going to tell you exactly how ridiculously intrusive the bills were into your personal life. And that's the problem. We have too many laws that intersect your personal life, involve themselves in your personal life and the way you want to raise your children, just like this one, the gender neutral stores in California. And that's why we do this segment. And that is the dumbest bill in America. And that's it For Mark and the Millennials, this is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.